Welcome back. 365 Sports. Grayson Grundhoefer, Sic'Em365.com, recruiting analyst. And Grayson, we'll get your opinion on Pac-12 Media Days in a second. But big news for Baylor as they've added another defensive line transfer in Justin Sambu from Maine. Your thoughts on this? That it's only been about 5 weeks since he entered the portal as a grad transfer, but it's another experienced guy along the defensive line, which is something they really needed going into the season.
Definitely. And I mean, if you've been following on Sic'Em 365 Premium, you would know that this was coming because Baylor offered 2 weeks ago. This wasn't something that he posted publicly, but once Baylor offered, he really tried to get everything together so that he could transfer to Baylor. And by that, I mean getting all the transfer credits together, getting ready to move down to Waco. There's just a lot of things that go into it, especially for transfers. But the good news for the Baylor side of things is he's a grad transfer, so he'll be eligible immediately. He's got one more season to play, so he decided to spend his last year in Waco at Baylor. So, I mean, a lot of positives here by adding Justin Sambu. His other big offer, I guess, was Mississippi State. That was kind of the other school that really caught his attention. He had other offers from Central Michigan, Georgia State, Buffalo, James Madison. But in general, he's just a guy who's going to come in, provide a lot of versatility, a lot more depth. I expect him to be in the 2 deep. My initial thoughts are he'll probably be Gabe Hall's backup. So Gabe Hall, TJ Franklin, the starters at those 2 positions. And then I think Justin Sambu and probably Jackie Marshall will be TJ Franklin's backup there. So I think he'll be in the 2 deep immediately. And this is a guy who was pretty productive last year at Maine. He had 5.5 sacks, 6 quarterback hurries, 7 tackles for loss, and a forced fumble. So really solid career. I don't think he's going to come in and be an all Big 12 type guy, but I do think when you have a guy like this who's proven what he can do, who's older, who's experienced, I don't think you can have enough of those guys. And I think he's going to make a very, very nice impact on this Baylor defense.
There's been some connections with some of the guys they picked up in the past. Any idea of the connection, or was there not one? It was just a guy who, hey, we need help in this position, and here's somebody who's available.
Right. So not really sure on much of a connection outside of this. He visited Baylor in high school with his high school football team. Now, he's from Canada, so I don't know exactly what that visit entailed, but that's just something that he told me, that he visited there in high school, and that really stood out to him, and it ended up being a school that he liked from that point on. And then obviously building relationships with Dave Aranda and Dennis Johnson throughout this recruitment process made things pretty easy for him since he already had, a little bit of familiarity with the Baylor program.
Grayson, what do you think the rotation will be like on that defensive line?
I think that's going to be a really interesting question, and probably not one that we'll get an answer to until probably something like week 4 into the season, because I do think Baylor's probably going to try to not show a ton of things. I know they play Utah week 2, so you're going to have to show a lot, but I think they're probably going to hold some things back. But some of the things that we saw last year, there's an opportunity that Baylor could come out in their peso package, which would be, TJ Franklin and Gabe Hall essentially playing defensive tackle with Byron Bonds and Garmin Randolph on the outside. So I think that's a wrinkle that they could show. But in general, when they're playing their base front, I could see something where, TJ Franklin and Gabe Hall on the ends with Trevin Maya, the transfer from Oregon, anchoring in the middle, and then having Byron Bonds at the jack position. So I could see something like that, but they're going to mix and match a ton. They got a lot of guys now who I think are going to play a lot, but that'd be my initial thoughts on the starting rotation. And then in the second group, you'd have Justin Sambu, Jackie Marshall, Cooper Lands, Garmin Randolph, something along those lines makes a lot of sense. And that's before even mentioning guys like Trey Wilson, who had a really nice camp. And then, some of the other guys that, we're kind of waiting to see how their health does with guys like Jarrell Boykins and Trey Emery.
So, Grayson, on the podcast earlier this week, you and I kind of got into, confusion on kind of what the expectations are for the team this season. And you've been pretty positive about them. I've sat around 8-4. I think about most people are probably somewhere in that vicinity. I feel like you were a bit more of a, hey, if things go right, they can win 10 games or more. Where are you now? Because by the time we wrapped up our podcast, I know you were saying that like winning 7 games or so, that's not going to get anybody fired, nor was I trying to indicate that. But I almost came across like that would be like almost your expectation now. Has your expectation changed, or is it just, were we talking hot seat and there was some confusion there?
No, I think it's more of just this idea that, I think based on what people say on the website, there's been a lot of talk that if he doesn't win 8 games, then Dave Aranda needs to be on the hot seat. And I pause. I take a huge pause with that, because I do think, if he goes out and they go 7-5, and again, that basically is me saying you lose to a top 10 Utah team and then you go 5-4 in conference play, which really is not bad at all. That got you 4th in the Big 12 last year. If they finish 4th in the Big 12, that's technically finishing above expectations, since they're picked 6th in the Big 12 this season. So I guess it's more of that kind of mindset. Now, as far as my expectations for Baylor, I'm kind of right in line with a lot of people. Like, I think they should win 8 games. Like, yeah, they absolutely should. This is a better team than they were a year ago. They got a lot of home games. They got a lot of opportunities to prove themselves. And I think in general, my idea of their ceiling, like, I still believe this is a team that could win the Big 12 championship. And a big reason for that is I think the roster's a lot better. I think we've seen it before with this coaching staff. And then on the flip side, I don't think the Big 12 is unwinnable. Like, I think they can win any game on their schedule any given week. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now. I think if I were to put, a bet on it, or where I think Baylor would finish this year, I think I'm right around that 9-3, 8-4 mark. But I do see a high ceiling with this team.
Okay, that makes more sense. And yeah, that's why, like, sometimes we just got to, like, not the message board infiltration into our brains on certain things. Like, yeah, that's always going to be a more negative slant, right? The message board side of things, for sure. But coming out of Big 12 Media Days, you got to go around and talk about or talk to or hear from a lot of different people. So non-Baylor related here, what were your major impressions, or your major, like, 2-3 maybe takeaways on who you're thinking differently about, for better or worse, coming out of that event?
I think the first one is something that's really, right after hearing Sonny Dykes talk, it really got on my brain immediately. And that's the fact that, TCU's picked to finish 5th in the Big 12 by the media. And, as I looked at TCU more, as I listened to their players and Sonny Dykes talk, and as you look into their schedule more and more, I think that is way too low. And this is a team that played in the national championship a year ago. And the more that I look at things, the more I'm starting to think TCU is probably more like 3rd or 2nd in the Big 12 than 5th. And so that's definitely one that I've been looking at. Sonny Dykes seems to have a ton of confidence that their offense is going to be just as good as it was a year ago. And he thinks their defense is going to take a huge step forward, which I felt like was a very encouraging sign for the Horned Frogs. I think their biggest thing is, can they replace the leadership that they lost from last year's team? We'll see on that. But if they can handle adversity like they did a year ago, then they could find themselves right back in the Big 12 championship. The other one that I was kind of looking at that, again, it's one of those weird ones, because we've seen Mike Gundy have success for years with, whether it's with mediocre teams or with really good teams. He's found a way to win games. He's made bowl game after bowl game. He's had so many 10-win seasons. But I really think this team is going to have to fight to make a bowl this year. And, for a while in there, I kind of had them as, I think I had them in my preseason poll as 8th or 9th. And this was going into Big 12 Media Days. So my expectations weren't through the roof. But what I will say is I felt like they were kind of a dark horse because of their schedule. But the more that I listened to Mike Gundy, the more I listened to him talk about the transfer portal, the more I look at their roster. Their defense is literally going to have to be the best in the Big 12. And then their offense is going to have to just impress with guys that are very unproven or older guys who really haven't lived up to kind of what they were billed at, such as Alan Bowman. He's just been hurt so often, and then just sat on the bench for a couple years at Michigan. It's hard to count on that for this season. So I think those two, TCU being better than I think everyone's thinking, and then Oklahoma State being more like a 6-6 team as opposed to a true dark horse in the Big 12.
Grayson, your thoughts on what went on at Pac-12 Media Days today?
Just very interesting. Just the quotes and just kind of what has been said by George Kliavkoff, just very interesting to sit there and say that, you're going to talk about football today and not talk about the media deal. And essentially he kind of alluded to the fact that they have one done, but they don't. They clearly don't. And so that's where it's extremely weird that he's acting with all this confidence and acting basically like it's a done deal, talking about how the longer this goes on, the better it is for the Pac-12. I can't imagine that he sits there late at night and rewatches what he said and actually believes some of the things that he was saying. Very interesting stuff there. And that's not to say that they won't end up with a media deal. That's not to say that, this couldn't turn out positive for the Pac-12. But at this very moment, to act with that much confidence and to, almost blatantly lie, I feel like it is very, very weird from a, Pac-12 commissioner. So yeah, it was not a great look in my opinion for the Pac-12 today.
Grayson Grundhoefer, Sic'Em365.com with us. Grayson, always great stuff. Thanks for hopping on. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks guys. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
All right. From Grayson, a Baylor legend in his own